Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, it's more in our A+ series, so much fun, so little time, right? Joining us back in the studio yet again on that topic, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, glad to have you yet again, sir, and how's it going?
Oh man, it's going great. Great to be back here. That's right, we were talking in the first part of this little mini-series here, we were talking about workstation security. Actually, over the past few episodes, we've been talking about security in general, but we're back with a part two, and we've got to finish up just a few of the objectives that we didn't get to tackle in the first part. And in the first part, we were really just talking about, password best practices. I will tell you, Dan, there is one thing that I kind of forgot when it comes to workstation security, when it comes to passwords. We talked heavily about pretty much the operating system passwords, right? And you've seen it. If you're not familiar with that, go back and watch that. I'm sure you guys and gals out there are already familiar with that, but if you're not, go back and watch part one, right? But there is another password that you also have to consider too when it comes to workstation security. And this password is actually set and it challenges you for the password prior to the operating system ever loading up. And it is one that they call out, and we've actually touched on this in our BIOS episodes. And I want to say that was one of the very first of the 901 episodes, Dan, that we shot, where it basically allows you to set one of two different types of passwords. You can set a standard BIOS or UEFI. Keep in mind, we're talking about firmware, right? Well, just one's older than the other. But whether it's basic input-output system or the unified extensible firmware interface, you can set two types of passwords. You can set what's known as a just basic BIOS password, and you can also set what's known as a supervisor, sometimes called an administrator password. So what do? Well, let's tell you what both of them do first, because they both have a commonality, and then one is a little bit different. All right. Both of them allow you to boot the operating system. So understand, when a BIOS password challenges you, it's going to be a very low-level text screen because the video card isn't even initiated. And it says, hey, yeah, you're going to be allowed to just initiate the hardware, bring it online. And then the operating system bootstraps. Now, I want you to understand that this is platform independent. Doesn't matter if we're talking about a Windows operating system. Doesn't matter if we're talking about Linux operating systems, Unix systems. And I'm not really sure about the Mac. I'll have to defer you guys to our Mac episodes that we have on that, honestly. And that's just because they're very strict on the hardware that they have. But in PC land, right, we have what are known as, well, PC BIOS has passwords, right? And both the regular BIOS password and the administrator password allow you to turn the hardware on essentially after you log in and then start the operating system. Now, the administrator or supervisor password, as it's called a lot as well, allows you to do a little bit more. All right. That allows you to go into your BIOS settings, your UEFI settings, and make changes within the BIOS. All right. And I'm using those interchangeably, guys and gals out there, because keep in mind, we're talking about pretty much, again, just firmware. All right. And what the administrator or supervisor password allows you is not only to bootstrap the operating system, to bring the hardware online and the operating system can load, is it allows you to get into the BIOS and make changes, settings and stuff inside of BIOS. If you have just the normal BIOS password, then you can't get into BIOS, right? We can't press the key combination that brings us into the setup screen, right? We have to have that administrator password. Now, I'm going to give you a little piece of advice here for the exam, and I don't know if this is going to come up in 902 or 901 because this kind of blurs the line between software and hardware, right? That's why we call firmware. It's why it gets its name, right? It's not quite hardware, but it's not quite software, right? Firmware is that just basically machine-specific code that allows the hardware to come online. There might be a chance that you need to reset that password, all right? And that means that somebody's forgot it. A lot of times that's what will happen. Somebody forgets the password. The other thing that could happen too is if you get, maybe you're in a tech situation where you work on a tech bench, and maybe you're going to be the tech that actually receives, let's say, 50 computers that were donated from an organization that now wants to give them to a school. All right, well, they had their BIOS passwords potentially set and turned on, and you don't know what those BIOS passwords are. Well, what you can do is a couple of things. One of the easiest things you can do to reset the BIOS password, reach over and flip the CMOS battery out. Just leave it out for a few seconds. All right, because those settings are stored in CMOS, right? Those user-defined settings. Now, I will tell you more than that. There are little jumpers on the motherboard that allow you to pull the little fuse off and rearrange it in a certain way that also breaks the circuit. It's essentially doing the same thing as flipping the battery out. It's breaking that circuit. One of the great things about motherboards today is they actually have CMOS reset buttons on them, and I really like these because you don't have to worry about flipping the CMOS battery out. You just reach over, you push a button, hold it in. You'll see the light go off of the, usually you get some kind of LED diagnostic light that'll just basically dissipate and it'll come back on when you let it go. All right, so do keep that in mind that there's a few different ways to do that. It could come up on the exam, and I have to tell you, you really should be studying both of 901 episodes and 902 episodes, really, just to get the full benefit so that when you go on into either exam, you kind of know how the operating system and the hardware work together, because you really can't have one without the other, right? All right, so did want to take care of that. It is one that I didn't mention in our password management. Now, there are other things that we can do when it comes to basic workstation security, and that's more related to the account management side. Now, Dan and I, we talked about NTFS permissions and share permissions in another episode. Understand that the security that we're talking about here with workstations, this isn't something that is Windows specific. All right, when I talk about restricting permissions, okay, doesn't matter if you're in Windows, it doesn't matter if you're in Unix, doesn't matter if you're in Linux or if you're in Mac, right? And I say Mac, but Mac basically uses a BSD subsystem, so it's essentially under the hood a Unix system. All right, you have permission sets also, ACLs, in Unix-based systems as well. All right, I believe you get 3 permissions by default. I can't remember. I think it's, read, write, and execute, I believe are the 3 permissions in those systems. But the point is, you restrict them, right? We always use the principle of least privilege when it comes to account management. Doesn't matter what platform you're in, right? It means that you only give your users the level of access that they need, no more, no less, right? It's why we've stressed in other episodes, don't run as your Windows administrator, don't run as your root user unless you need to. And then once that privilege escalation that you've just achieved is no longer needed, you de-elevate it. I don't know if that's a word, but I'll make up a word, right? You just remove those privileges so that you don't have software and functionality that's running in the background in the context of the most privileged user account. All right, so what are some other things? Restricting user permissions are one. We've already talked about user permissions. If you're not aware of NTFS permissions inside of Windows, which is probably going to be something that they're going to ask you on the exam, we want you to go back over and check those out. All right, Windows security settings, I believe, is what the episode was called there. All right, now there's other things that we can do too. All right, some of these are done by default, and that's disabling the guest account. All right, the guest account in Windows has been disabled. It doesn't matter if it's Windows Vista, Windows 7, or Windows 8 or 8.1. In fact, I got a Windows 8.1 machine. Let me show you what I mean here. So if I right-click on the desktop and I go to Computer Management, all right, remember there's many different ways to get to computer management. This just happens to be one of the faster ways that I like to get there. All right, and if I look at local users and groups and I expand this out and we have users, all right. I want you to notice that there are a few user accounts, right? We have administrator and we have guest. Now, you might have heard Dan and I talking about, and I know myself, showing you me logging in as an administrator, all right? Understand that the first user that you create on a Windows machine is an administrative user, but that administrative account is in the administrative group, right? So let me show you what I mean here, right? Admin, if I right-click and I choose Properties and I look at the Member Of tab, I can see that admin is a user that is in the administrators group, all right? Now, I don't want to confuse you because I want you to know that the most privileged account inside of Windows today, again, is the administrator, but notice the little black down arrow in a white circle. All right, what that means, if I right-click and I look at Properties here, notice that it says this count is disabled. All right, and let me kind of tell you why. All right, one of the things that is inside of Windows is when you have a user account, you have what is known as a security identifier, a SID. Okay, and it's a long string of characters, and I don't even know if I can show you one at this point. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. But it's a long string of characters, all right? And that string of characters is actually what the operating system uses to identify that user, all right? And the important thing to understand is that inside of Windows, the default administrator, going all the way back to the days of XP when it wasn't disabled like it is in Vista and beyond, has a specific number. In fact, if I can remember right, I'm going to shoot from the hip, Dan, here, and you know what? This always works well, right?
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead. We're going to go to Reg Edit. I bet you I know where I can find this the SIDS. Again, don't be messing with the registry, right? But I believe they're in HKey users, and if there we go. Yeah, so I can show you some of the service set or the security identifiers. All right. Notice these. These are the SIDS. All right, the security identifiers are how the operating system identifies the end user. You see these right here with the 500 at the end of them? Guess what they are? They're your Windows administrator. It's that disabled account. But what you guys do, maybe you do realize, Dan over here, he's got a black hat in his closet. All right, he's also got a white hat, and I don't know, maybe a leather hat too, right? But he's got a black hat, okay? And he knows that the default administrative account is the most powerful account, and if he can get access to it and he can crack it, then he has privileged access to the machine. All right, that is something that isn't uncommon knowledge. That is common knowledge out in the hacking community. All right, well, the problem is that if you can gain access to the one that we know ends in 500, that's all I need. I don't care what the other streaks are. What do you think I might be able to do if I can gain access to that account?
I'm going to go with any dang thing you please.
That's exactly it, right? And that's one of the reasons, for security purposes, that administrative account is disabled, right? Because of that very fact. Doesn't matter. They tell you, rename the account, right? Well, you can rename the account all you want. It's still going to have that same 500 at the end of the SID, and that's why it's disabled. But this is more about the other accounts that you have, right? The other account that you have, and they kind of call out the guest account. And again, a guest account, again, is a limited account, if you will. And notice it says built in for guest access to the computer or the domain. Well, I don't want anybody to just have guest access to my operating system, all right? And again, that's since Vista, it's already been disabled. They tell you that the good security practices are to go ahead and disable it. But I want you to know, inside of a Windows environment, it is disabled by default. And in fact, even in a lot of access points and wireless communications, you'll see that the guest account is actually disabled by default. So do want to make mention of that too. Now, some of the other things that you can do inside of account management, they talk about failed attempt lockouts, all right? And what do we mean by failed attempt lockouts, all right? Well, we talked about in the first part, and Dan, I believe it was you that mentioned this, that when it comes to protecting passwords, it isn't just a single setting that'll protect the password, right? It's a collection of things, right? Not only do we have password expirations, we have things like password history, password complexities. You mentioned character set. Even gave us an example of a 9-character, I think it was, password, on how many days that it would take, right? It was 80 days or just around there, right? So what do we need to worry about when it comes to other things that we can do to make passwords more resilient to password-based attacks, right? We talked about dictionary attacks. We've talked about some of the other attacks, brute force attacks that are out there, guessing and just randomly typing passwords, right? Well, this software usually works on some kind of automated approach, with the exception of guessing, right? Guessing isn't an automated approach, right? But it's going to work on constantly trying passwords over and over and over. All right, well, if I want to even stop things like guessing attacks on a machine, I don't want somebody just randomly walking into my my building and start typing as many passwords as they can to try to guess, we can do what are known as lockout thresholds. All right, and let me go ahead and show you. And I don't think this is defined at the domain level, so I should be able to just do this locally rather than switching back over to the domain controller and worrying about it like I did in the first part here. So we're going to go, and by the way, you don't have to have a domain controller. If you have the professional level edition or business editions and beyond of your Windows machines, you can do this as well without ever setting up a second computer, which is also a good thing to have. So we've kind of shown you a couple of different things that are going on. All right.
And one of the secondary benefits of setting a threshold here is that if someone is trying to break in through a password as an attack vector, then you're going to know about it very quickly, because your user is going to try to log in. It's going to say my account is disabled. Or if this is your personal machine, you go to log in and it says your account is disabled due to overabundance of login attempts. Oh, well, I didn't overabundantly try to log in and get failed attempts. I know my own password. That's going to key you up to the fact that something is happening. And now you're going to pay attention. You're probably going to start looking at logs, seeing where that login was coming from. Maybe somebody came to your computer and tried to log in multiple times and met that threshold and then moved on to the next block because obviously, no, the account is locked out now. So that can be a really good indication that something is happening, and now you'll start paying attention.
Yeah, and now you have that repudiation, right? I can find out that it's happening through audit trail. So let me go ahead and show you, all right, where you can configure this. And in fact, Dan, because you mentioned that, I think I might want to end up switching over to the domain controller so that I can show you then the exact thing on the properties of the account, how it does get locked out. But either way, the policy is going to be the same, right? So if I go down to my computer configuration, we expand out Windows settings, and we wait for it, and we expand out security settings. A little bit different, right? We've been talking about account policies, and there's password policies here. But now what we're going is we're going to go ahead and go to account policies. Now I could expand this out, and I love how it just makes the triangle disappear. But notice that there is this account lockout duration threshold, if you will, and reset lockout counter after. All right. Now notice that it tells me how many invalid attempts do I want to allow before it locks the machine out. And by default, it's set to 0, right? Well, that just means that, hey, there is no lockout count. We're not counting here, right? But I could actually manipulate this. And like I said, Dan, I like where your mind was at. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and show you guys how to log into a domain
It's like I've
controller.
done this before.
Yeah, you know,
it's weird. Weird.
You poor soul.
Yeah.
That's right. So what we'll go ahead and do here is we'll show you how you would do this in a corporate environment, and I can kind of show you, piggyback off of Dan's explanation here and kind of show you the hands-on here. Right, so if I go to my server manager, and again, you're going to see that the settings are going to be just the same, right? I will open up our group policy management, just get to it a little bit different inside of the domain. But if I go ahead and I edit the policy here, we're going to be, again, under computer configuration, we're going to be looking at our Windows settings, and we're going to be under security settings. All right, so for the most part, a couple of things change in the path, but I don't want you to worry about that. But notice that, again, we're talking about account policies, right? And under account policies, I have lockout policies. Now, you guys will go on to learn that the reason there's another one in here is because this is the protocol that allows you to authenticate into a Windows domain. But again, don't worry about that right now. Just a little tidbit out there for those of you that are going on to additional training after that, including things like Network Plus. So, hint, 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 check out our Network Plus exam or content. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to change this up a little bit, right? I'm going to go ahead and what I'm going to do is, get you guys motion sick here, I'm going to go ahead and choose the account will not lock out, right? I'm going to change that. Now it says the account will lock out after one invalid attempt. All right. Now,
I like that.
Yeah, exactly. Now you want to talk about increasing your stress, right?
Yeah.
Increasing your blood pressure and the administrative complexities to managing your passwords, right? We've mentioned this throughout this series too when we're talking about security, right? It's old Lady Liberty out there, if you will. It's a balance, right? Because we could say, you know what, if you don't type your password in right, I'm going to lock you out. I'd have been locked out in every show that I've shown you
Yes,
guys
you
so
would have.
far, right? That would not be good. Because I want you to think about it, even in worst case scenario is you're going to be locked out regardless, but even best case scenario, how about the person that comes in on Monday morning and needs to log in before they've had their cup of coffee? Well, it doesn't matter. I've had 3 cups of coffee and still can't log in,
yeah.
right? Let alone if you had 4 or 5, maybe you're just jittery. So you can actually, you can increase security, but your convenience level, right, and your stress level, I guess, is going to go up as well. But your convenience level is definitely going to wane. So it's always that fine balance. I'm going to go ahead and just do 3 for this sake. You might do something like 5. All right, and there are some settings that they tell you that they're going to go ahead and set because if you set a lockout threshold, or a lockout, how many invalid attempts, and you don't set how long they're going to be locked out, well, it doesn't really benefit you, right?
Now, they got to call the help desk or somebody with administrative credentials so they can manually unlock your account.
Right, exactly. And that's what we're going to go ahead and do. We're going to go ahead and say okay to this, and I believe the lockout, let me check. No, it's not this. It's the duration. Reset the counter. And okay, so we're good. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not missing that setting here. Okay, so there we go. All right, now we've got this set. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead essentially and apparently try to open something that's not going to open. Oh, it's the Windows Store. It doesn't like low resolution. Well, that's okay. I'm not trying to open that anyways. Let's go ahead and we're going to fire up our command prompt. All right, and essentially what I'm going to do is run GP update. With the force option here, right? These are the droids you're looking for. Essentially what I want to do is I want to force this machine to reach out to that domain controller, that centralized machine, and I want it to pull down these settings so that we can show you here on camera. And then what we're going to do is we're gonna forget to type our password, right? And you're probably saying, Wes, you don't need any help with that, but I'm going to go ahead.
Try to log in as normal, Wes.
There we go. Don't change your thing, right? So we'll go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead real quick, and I'll do a log off here. I'll sign out as the administrator, and we'll go ahead. And since Dan's so nice to me in this episode here, we're going to type Dan, right? And I'm just going to run my hand across the keyboard. Run my hand across the keyboard. We're going to see, hopefully this works. Run my hand across the keyboard, and that was the third time, right?
That was the third time.
All right, and there we go. And this is what Dan's talking about when he says, hey, I've gotten these calls more than you would like to know. All right, notice it says the reference account is currently logged out and may not be logged into. All right, so let me go ahead, and I know Dan's password. Let me type Dan's password. Well, it doesn't matter now that I know the password. It is locked out. And this is where what he meant when he said then you have to have an administrator around to unlock the account, right?
Or wait the 30 minutes.
Or wait the 30 minutes. Good point, right? Because that duration is there. So now what I have to do is he receives the call, all right, and we go over to the location and where his account is stored, and I right-click, and I choose somewhere in the list, Properties, and then Account. Notice what it says, unlock the account. This account is currently locked out in Active Directory on this domain controller. So what I have to do, or what he was saying that he would do in a business situation, is exactly this, choose OK. Now, I honestly don't remember Dan's password, so we might turn around and lock myself out again as we speak. Oh, and I still requires a change, but I got it, right? So let me go ahead and
we'll hold over from the previous show.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We'll go ahead and try to just change his password here, and we'll log. Oh, and that's not going to work. We'll try that one more time. This is what happens when you change your passwords multiple times on. You know what I know what I can do. I can do what every user does, right? We will just add
a number to the end.
To the end of it, right? Because that makes it more secure. There we go. So anyhow, notice that it required an administrator to allow him to log back in, all right? Or in this case, help desk, if it happens to be him that's the systems administrator. And now, like he said, again, kind of piggybacking off of that, you're aware that something like this is going on. Now, again, it's up to you to find out, is this happening maliciously, or it's like somebody like Wes who can't type to save their life, right? And either way, the end result's going to be the same, right? So, again, remember security, the balance in security, right? All right, so that is some of the things that you can do. The other thing that you can do, too, is you can do things like time of day restrictions. And let me go ahead. I'm going to switch back over to my domain controller here. And just because I cannot, for the life of me, remember the password, I'm going to go ahead and reset Student 01's password. There we go. Because I can't, for the life of me, remember it. All right, now, I can also set time of day restrictions, too. And again, when you talk about, they call it login time restrictions on your exam objectives. But, you know, they call it a little bit different here in the Windows. It just basically says login hours, right? And what I can do is, let's see, what time is it? This says 8 a.m. Let me make sure we're not up to date here, so that says 11 a.m. Oh, you know what I bet it is? I bet it's Eastern time versus Pacific time, or Pacific time. Yep, it's probably it. So it's on Bill Gates land time there, out there at Redmond, for our Redmond viewers out there that might be watching. All right, let me go ahead and close this down because you'll see that it didn't like that. It said, well, wait a second, you got time of day restrictions open here and you just changed the time of day, so you might want to close that down and refresh it. All right, so now that I got the time and the clock right here, let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is we're going to do, notice that it says login is permitted here. Well, I can actually say, you know what, I don't want somebody to be logged in, let's just say from 8 now. Obviously, you probably wouldn't do it this way, but you'll see the result,
night
right?
shift.
No, that's right. Hey, good point. It could be the night shift. So from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. daytime, I don't want anybody logging in, right? And we choose OK. All right, so we've applied that. We'll choose OK one more time. And now let's go ahead and let's log out. All right, so enough picking on Dan. Take that. We'll go ahead and we'll sign out. And what we'll do is we'll log back in here, hopefully as student 01. And what we'll see, we should see, is that it's going to tell us that there's some kind of problem logging in. It means, again, hey, I'm going to reach out, and when I send the authentication credentials across the network, I'm going to look at the properties of that account, essentially, or actually the server will do that. It's going to say, I'm not so sure about that. All right, because your account has time restrictions that prevent you from signing in at this time. Please try again later. Great example, Dan. Hey, it's the night shift. You're not supposed to be logged in, right? Remember we talked about principal at least privilege, right? Well, this isn't permissions, but it's a privilege to log on to a machine. It's called an interactive logon. That's actually a right in Windows. It's a privilege, right? And if you're going to give the least amount of privileges, well, then you don't need access to our machine. You don't need access to our corporate networks if you aren't on shift. We can do something like time of day restrictions, right? So that's another thing that you can do too. We kind of talked about a timeout and a screen lock, right? Keep in mind that you can set that up through the screensaver. Let's go ahead and switch this, and I have no clue if I have the password right on this. So we're going to try a whole bunch of them here, and we'll see if we don't get locked out again. I have to go unlock this account. So it does look like it's logging in here. Keep in mind that the Windows key L, again, will lock the machine. Notice that I did that little shortcut right there, Windows key L, that locks, right? You can also do this as a timeout as part of the screensaver that locks the machine likewise. One of the last things that I kind of want to address here, I probably should, well, I'll elevate my privileges here, is they talk about things like disabling auto run. Do you want, when somebody plugs a USB device in, do you want it to automatically look at that device, and if there's an application on it, do you want it to run? If you have things like, for instance, an optical disc, right, that has some kind of auto-run exe in it, right, do I want that to run? And chances are you don't want it to run, so you're going to want to be able to disable that, right? Well, let me show you how you can do that in Windows. If I drop down to the control panel here, and I'll go ahead and do that, drop down to control panel. All right, now this is a little bit different here, again, because you might think, well, that's in system and security, right? Well, be careful with this one, right? This is actually in hardware and sound, and that's autoplay. Now, it's going to be right there at the forefront if you've changed the view from category view to large icons. But notice autoplay here. When I bring up autoplay, it allows me to say, hey, what do I want to do when somebody plugs in a USB drive? In this case, they just classify it as a removable drive. I want to say, take no action. Or ask me, right? Now, you could control this like we've been showing you through other settings as well, but keep in mind that you can do that. Again, choosing what to do with each type of media, camera storage, and you can see DVDs as well. Again, because there are things that run on DVDs, right? Blu-ray, CDs, as well, and then also, if you will, resetting the devices too. All right.
Well, it's really good because hackers love to do this little trick where they'll take some USB flash drives, put malicious software on them, and then go throw them in a parking lot. And somebody walks by and they see, oh, there's a thumb drive laying on the ground, freebie, sweet. Oh man, it's even awesome. It's 500 gigabytes, excellent, man. I just got a free 500 gigabyte. You plug it in, auto run goes. You have no idea that it's now installing that malicious software, because auto-run just did it, right? Because that was the setting. If we remove that setting, at least it will ask them, do you want to run this software? Well, I'm not trying to run anything. I just want to look at the files. So why is it asking me to run something? Maybe it might make them think. And if it is auto-run anything that's going on, then you're done. Stick a fork in you. That's the end of it. You've now been infected, and that infection is probably going to propagate, and the user's none the wiser, right? So it's a really good idea just to turn this off. It's just another simple step that we can take to try to defend against attacks such as that.
Definitely, and you know what, we had a great question in the chat room, and it's one that benefits you on the exam, so I do want to throw it here in our episode, and thank you to you viewers out there. Always got to give you a shout out because you're asking great questions. The question came across because I am jumping from a client workstation to a server. Said, you don't think that the CompTIA is going to have maybe a simulation on a Windows server in A+, and my answer is probably not. I would say not likely because it's not called out on the exam. but let me show you what might be called out. In fact, if we'll go back to my machine here, I've been showing you from a centralized environment doing this through Active Directory. That's why Dan and I have kind of stressed that we're showing you some things that you would see in the real world as a help desk technician. But what I think they might do is if I drop down, for instance, the modern UI, or I could drop down to traditional run line, and this is in every Windows operating system that's on the exam, and I could type gp edit.msc, and when we run that, that brings up your and you know what? I don't have.
You're not logged in as an admin.
I'm not logged in as administrator, so that might be a problem too. I'll tell you what. Let me go ahead and just sign out here. And while I'm signing in, hopefully, what I believe that they will do, while they might not have you perform these actions within a server type environment. Let's try that one more time. Again, I could do this from the start screen, or I could do this from the run line. Again, kind of jump in there. Notice it tells me this task will be created with administrative privileges, which is really what I want. And I type gpedit.msc. And what I can do here is I can configure this through the local group policy editor. And if you'll notice that under computer configuration, we're looking at almost the identical settings. In fact, pretty close to the identical setting. It's just how it's grouped together inside of the server side. I don't think you have to worry about that, but if you have to set a password policy, if you have to set these account lockout thresholds, you're going to have to know that you go into computer configuration, Windows settings, security settings, and you'll have to go under account policies and then either password policy here and know these settings. I would know these settings, right? Be aware of them. But then I would also know where you see things like your lockout policies too. That might be something that is definitely or could be called out on the exam. So while I don't believe that they're going to have you in a server environment doing this, they might have you doing it from your local group policy editor. I also want you to keep in mind too, they might ask you to do this from your administrative tools as well. So let's go ahead. Again, great questions out there. Keep them coming. And who knows, your question might just show up in one of the IT Pro TV episodes, because what benefits you could benefit a lot of other people too. If I right-click on our Windows tile here, we go to Control Panel, System and Security, scroll all the way down, we get into Administrative Tools. Notice that we have our local security policy, all right, secpol.msc would launch it. I'll say that again, secpol.msc will launch this same exact thing. And if I launch the local security policy here, I want you all to pay attention, if you will, to look at these top two folders. All right, notice that these top two folders have the locks, and they also say account policies and local policies. So if I expand out local policies here from the local security policy, notice that, account policy. Sorry, guys. Let me get that right side of the river there. Notice that under account policies, I also have the same exact settings, right? And if I look over here, I can see all of those settings that we were just talking about, but notice that we're setting them from a different location. So notice your local group policy editor, know your local security policy, and know some of these settings. That's why Dan and I take the time to show you this, but we also give you a little bit more benefit that you can see something that you might even be doing as a help desk, where they give you the privileges, they delegate administration over a certain account, a certain folder, if you will, inside of Active Directory, and allow you to reset the passwords or unlock accounts. It's not uncommon that might happen. Last two things I want to mention, we've talked about in other episodes. Dan, I know I've kind of blown the roof off of the time clock here on this one. Last couple of things, data encryption. Remember, inside of Windows, you're going to use something like encrypted file system that we talked about in another episode pretty heavily. It allows the owner of a file to encrypt it so that only that owner can view it. And then also patch management, if you will, and update management. We've talked pretty extensively about patch management and patching systems in other episodes, as well as using things like Windows Update to make sure that security patches are applied to your machine on a regular basis. Remember, you can set it and forget it. It's not a bad thing, but also if you are doing patch management, you should be doing patch management as normal system maintenance, let alone preventative maintenance. You should also be running, which they don't call out here as part of Workstation security, is your backup utilities, right? That should not be a just considered, hey, a when I need it. It is part of security because those three letters in the CIA triad, right? CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Availability is part of security. And if I don't have, if the data that I need access to, I don't have it available, then it runs counterproductive to security. So even though they don't call them out here in the exam, do keep in mind not only good patch management, update management, but your backups as well.
All right, great stuff, Wes. This is one of the my wheelhouse. I love security. I love networking. Right, security. That's my two big topics. And everything that Wes has told you is spot on. You need to be able to follow these policies, best practices. Especially, I mean, we've been talking about update management. That's a huge one, right? Password policies, huge. Make sure that you understand exactly how you can work with those and make them work to your benefit inside of your environment so that you can keep the bad guys at bay. Wes, we do thank you for stopping by today.
Sure.
We thank our good audience out there for watching as well. But as you said, we're well out of time for this episode, so we're going to go ahead and sign off. For IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.